Colleen is currently working on the second Fantastic Beasts film. She was simultaneously also designing Tim Burton's Dumbo until about 3 weeks ago, as far as I can see. And so she came straight from set today. So we're so grateful that you're here. Colleen is one of the most formidable artists that I've ever had the privilege to work with. She has had huge acclaim. She was nominated for 12 Oscars. She's won 4. And the variety and the span of her work from Philadelphia and The Silence of the Lambs through to collaborations with Tim Burton, with Rob Marshall, with Jonathan Demme, with David Yates. It's an extraordinary variety of work. And so we're so thrilled to have you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for being here.
I wanted to start with, I read that you wanted to be a painter. Is that true?
It's true.
And
it's
what
true.
happened?
I studied art. I chickened out. Life happened. I had a child when I was 17, and I had to make a living, and I did study art, and I got, at the time when I was that age, there were a lot of art scholarships, so I did get to go to a great art school in Seattle, Washington called Cornish School of the Arts, and I studied painting there. But I had to work the whole time. I wasn't like, I could just go do that. So I ended up working selling Yves Saint Laurent clothes in the early 70s when his stuff was just like so new and, a whole revelation in fashion, and working in retail to make a living. And eventually I became a personal kind of buyer for all these people for couture. So I started going to the shows and doing that. And then my daughter ended up being old enough that I could move on and start seeing what my life was going to be, which I was about 27, 28. And I moved to New York and started my life in costume, but sort of at a very kind of, sort of at the bottom of the food chain, as it were, like doing any job I could, like, living in the back of a loft, doing whatever I could to make it work. And because I think I had the basis in a strange way, like seeing the transition in that period between clothing that was like sort of the traditionalist, like Givenchy and the kind of beautiful couture clothes they made into Saint Laurent, and the idea of ready to wear that was really high fashion, it set me apart from the other people that were kind of trying to come up doing that. And even though I didn't really know in film what I wanted to do, I met somebody by chance, and her mother was a production designer, and randomly I got a job on a movie called Ragtime, that working in the art department because someone didn't show up for work the first day.
Oh.
And that kind of led to, one job led to another. We won't talk about how much money I didn't make because it was really, like, some of you guys are going through. It's just like you just do it because you love it and you're going to do it, and it came from that. And painting kind of faded out because I don't think I was that great a painter. I mean, I always dream of painting still, and I think that someday, in my own kind of whacked out way, I might like go back to, I'll be blind and my hands won't work, but, feeling stuff in that way. But I think it's whatever it is that comes from painting or sculpture or anything at all, it all plays into costume. I always say nothing that you do in your life, whether it's being a waitress or serving drinks or doing whatever you do, goes unrelated to what you end up doing. It all kind of ends up tying together in the great puzzle that that our work is. Same for actors.
So it started in production design or art
department. Yeah.
So one of the things that's amazing,
more like coffee and cookies, but yeah, all that.
One of the things that's amazing about working with Colleen is her vision, certainly from an actor's point of view, seems to go far beyond just the items of clothing. It's about a look, and it's about collaboration. And do you feel that it was sort of observing all those other departments, did that have an effect on you?
Definitely. I think that observing the world, being part of the world on all different levels, and meeting the people, the kind of characters that you meet or you see on a street are so much more weird than like what people really are. So if you took it's like if you took all the people that you see on the street and put them together in a room without all the other people in the middle, it would be, no one would ever believe it, that it was real. And I think that that's what makes developing character and developing design in film interesting, is that you're sort of, and doing the whole concept of an overview of a film, is that you're taking the people that are in between, and you're taking the people that are in front of the camera, and you're taking the people that sort of come across them in a room or maybe sit next to them but they are not acknowledged. Creates the feeling for the film. It creates the beauty, and it creates the sort of rawness of what real life is, but still amplifies it, because you can control the hair. You can, on a good day, and then you can control the hair, and you can control the makeup, and you control the style of what's in the room, where in life you can't necessarily do that, but in film you can, and that makes the whole kind of pistache of it all kind of work together.
There's something that I find riveting about that, because what is so I find depressing for us is that we get to see all these we see all the stages, and you see all the work with background artists, and the scale of it on the film that we're working on at the moment, these huge crowd scenes. But it's not your choice where the camera goes. And how do you cope with, in film, on the one hand, you're painting on this kind of, this massive scale, of crowds and how you pick people out of crowds, and yet on the other hand you're having to then go into intimate close-ups. How do you sort of, as it were, paint almost in the abstract and in the intimate simultaneously?
Ultimate control. Like, nobody can look bad, because if they do, they'll be right there. Like, there's always these people that you go, oh, not them again. You know, the second there's a close-up of an actor with somebody behind them, they'll be in the front row, like giving the wave. It's just like, there's people that are heat-seeking missiles for that. So I always kind of try to like bong them to the back.
But you're part of that process, the casting process of extras almost.
Well, it depends on the film. On Tim's movies, definitely. Yeah. I have total control over that, with his blessings, because he so doesn't want to do that. On other films, it's different. It just depends on the kind of mix with different departments, how that plays out. But on a film that's like a very kind of idealistically, you kind of control that. If you can't control that, you control the kind of the tears, I'd say. And then you just got to let go, because sometimes you just can't control it, and it's too crazy, and there's 500 people, and suddenly they're pulling like people from everywhere, or you fit all these people and they say, oh, we need 50 more on the day, and you bring them in, and you just got to. The one thing I think about art and about costume is that there's a point where you can control it up to a point. There's a point where you have to know when to walk away from it. That you've done it, you've done your part, and it's alive. And whatever happens in that room and in that space, you can no longer control. And I think that's true when I studied painting. Like, I really got figured out, like the hard way, sort of, that you got to a point with some paintings and they were finished, but you ruined them by doing too much more to them. And I think in design, you can do this. You can make the same mistakes. You know?
So back to the sort of painting thing. I read this that Rothko, when he came to paint, every morning would treat it like an office job, in the sense that he would arrive in his suit and then get into his overalls and start working from 9 to 5. I suddenly remembered about all these beautiful photos I have, which I haven't shown anyone. So I'm going to move swiftly onto this one. But starting, I just wondered about going to your process and to whether, and I always find it riveting with artists, how you seek inspiration. Is it about a rigor and formality? Is there a method to the way you work, or are you sort of just soaking things in and waiting to be inspired?
I think for me, I think everyone's different in how their brain works and how that process works for them. For me, I'm a morning person, so that part of my process is sort of really disciplined to begin in the morning, and I think that at the same time, sometimes, like if I'm in LA and I'm driving in my car in a catatonic state, I solve a problem, a design problem. If I'm sleeping, sometimes I have a dream about something that I know that's a costume, like a randomly costume thing, and I wake up in the morning and I solve the problem. So I think it's just like a matter of visual. I think if you're a visual person, you're always continually visualizing that process. And when it comes out, just depends on so many things, like how tired you are, the chemistry of your body, what you've eaten, what you've drank, what you've smoked, whatever, whatever it is that kind of works for you is different. But I think that there's a discipline to it, in the sense that even Rothko, maybe, Rothko's script, you have to, but even Rothko, when he got up in the morning, doesn't mean he wasn't thinking about the painting before he went there at 9 o'clock and he left at 5. I think or sometimes the thinking is not thinking, you're just there and you're doing, and it kind of flows into it, I think, especially with painting. But I can't believe that a guy like that wasn't always thinking about it, wasn't always in that space. Someone at that level of artistic achievement, I think, never leaves it, which is why, typically a lot of people that are really that gifted are also dysfunctional on certain levels.
Within that, though, when you read a script and it demands something like this film did, Memoirs of a Geisha, that I rewatched the other day, and it completely blew my mind. Almost the idea of you taking it on. I mean, how were you versed in that? What was the research like? Was the notion of it being like, when it comes to period or to something so specific as this, how is accuracy important, or do you allow yourself a freedom?
Well, it's interesting, like, that you say that, like, Memoirs of a Geisha, I was foaming at the mouth.
Oh, are you ready? Okay, good.
I was like, yeah? Are you kidding? It was a very enviable kind of project as in the design world.
Yeah.
And I think that the thing that was great about Memoirs of Geisha is that you read the book and you get to the back and it's written by like a minchy Jewish guy from upstate New York. And you're like, hey, set me free. You're kind of like, okay. He was never a geisha. Yeah. But it was a really complex project, because the world of the geisha is so complex. And, in his book, he really examined that. But it's also modernity coming into a culture, and, the incredible intimidating thing about that was to go to Japan and see how the Japanese do it.
But did you hold off that for a while?
No, I kind of went there. Luckily we went there as a group, the director, the DP, the producer, myself, and the production designer went on a cultural kind of exploration of Japan, which is one of the great gifts of my career. But we were, we went to, went to Kyoto, and we went into the countryside, and we went to sumo matches. We went to we called them shrimples, shrines, temples. We went to every shrine and every temple and like examined, the Japanese. We were ushered by sort of Japanese film company and stuff. But luckily, in some ways, the structure of Japan is very complex and very Byzantine. But the graciousness of the Japanese people is so excessively special that, like, if I would talk to somebody we went to this house that was it was a 500-year-old tea house in Kyoto, and I saw all these prints on the walls, and I started talking to these people that were just there, and it ended up that it was owned by a textile company, and called it was called Tatsumura Textiles. It still is. It's been there for 400 years, many generations. And I started talking to the people there, and I was like, how come all these, what are all these amazing textiles and things? And the guy go, oh, well, there in that culture, if you have a huge, it's a status thing to take a treasure and treasure it. And so these places survive because they're owned by a huge, Tatsumura Textiles. They're owned by huge companies. And Tatsumura Textiles wove stuff for me for the film graciously because I got busy with the people and started talking to them. And, they were amazing. But they do stuff for museums, but they also do stuff for the inside of airplanes. Mm. The journey is, you never know where you're going to end up when you start. You have the cultural tour, and then you kind of go off on your own things as an artist, and finding those people just in a sort of the most inappropriate, probably to them, because they were freaking out because I was talking to these people. But there's so many ways that you can discover within the parameters of a structure that it kind of took the level of. You knew the level of artistry in that culture and in the thing, but modern Japan doesn't know much about. They aren't so embracing or knowledgeable about the geisha,
right?
More so than the West, but not really. So it was quite freeing to go there and to see it and to see within the world how it reflected the story. To wind it up there. So, next
but interesting the thing of discovering specialists, because that's something, through our experience of working together, all the elements of the costumes that I've worn, whether it's the boots that are made by a leather maker in Italy or to the specifics of the fabrics that you've found have then been laser printed on top of, it seems to me that a massive part of your genius is finding people and allowing people to freedom under your. Now, has that changed with technology? Is that something since you've been working, is it something is that inspiring, or is
it's one of the most inspirational things for me to find people that have skills like craftspeople and people that have old skills and then new skills and ways to take the old skills of the feeling of weaving or the feeling of leather work and things like that, and translate it into new materials, new techniques to make it. Sometimes I have to make 1,000 suits of armor, or all these, like a huge amount of things. So you can't really do it the old way, but you can take the old way and figure out how to make it, how to make it feel like that, but be feasible on a financial level and on a visual level that's something you can live with. But the thing that's great is the people you find that help you create it and help you find it, help you find the feeling, the textures, from a metal ring to a piece of leather to, all these things. The people that bring that to the table with me elevate me to a level I don't deserve to be elevated to, because they really are a huge part of that process. Because I'll we riff off each other. I'll go, here, let's try this. And then I come back and then tried something else. And it's so much better than what I was thinking that you're going. I have no shame. I go, yeah, that's great. Let's do that instead. You can't have so much, I think that you can't have so much pride in your own kind of vision that you can't close it to other people's visions. And I think that embracing it all makes your work, it brings your work up artistically and in the film process especially. You have to also on that level, you have beautiful things that you can make, but if an actor can't wear them and it doesn't feel comfortable or like close to them, it doesn't ever really work in a certain way.
So going back to, I suppose, process, what the notion of collaboration is one of the weird things I find about films is that everyone involved in it reads a film in a vacuum or reads a script in a vacuum, whether it's the director, the costume designer, the actors, the production designer. Everyone has their initial instinct on something, and those things are strong instincts. And how, in your process, you then have to very quickly collaborate. And what I find interesting as an actor is one of the first people we speak to, normally months and months beforehand, is the costume designer. And weirdly, that's just when the thoughts are germinating. And so it's almost one of the most, for me, one of the most specifically influential moments. How much in collaboration is it about you retaining what your instinct and idea is and really fighting for that if you think it's stronger than someone else's? And how much is it actually about your clothes fitting in with the way the production designer views their sets or the director's take on it or the actor's very specific? Does that make sense? I don't know if that makes sense.
All that stuff. So, well, for me, like you, the first thing I do is read the screenplay and then talk to the director about his or her vision of that particular story. Sometimes when I read something, I see it, and sometimes I see it very strongly in a color, in a thing, and then when I go meet with, I hold back the first time because when I first meet with them, I don't want to go, well, I think that's red, and that's like all that. But you kind of like examine their point of view first. Depending now, because in the span of my career, the compression of the preparation of the particular vision of the film has become very, very tight. So it's economics, it's modern times, everything's faster. So what I usually do when I come in for my first meeting with the director is I have images that I just kind of find that kind of in my own kind of way relate to the characters. And I usually try to approach it from, my first approach is more from who that person is to me. So I'll go back to images of different people I see from books that I own and things ways I kind of my personal journey about the character. And I take that into the director, and it's sort of good to get, because a lot of times with film directors, the process is a reactive process. So you show them things and you see how they react to them, how they relate to them, if they connect with it, or if they're like, huh? So it's kind of, it just depends.
But what's interesting, I think, what I've noticed with you that's so specific is that the way whenever Colleen will show an image to our director, you'll have photographed it properly. It's like you want to show a complete or it's not just a random photo you've taken. You want it to be seen in its best light. Which I've never noticed before with any other, which I think is interesting because you want it to, because when directors are having to take so many pieces of information every day, you want it to be properly shot and sort of framed.
Yeah, I mean, the job of a director is beyond what anyone in this room could probably really imagine. But the job of the director is, reacting to, probably 60 or 70 people a day on light, this, that, whatever. So if I'm showing them an image, I want it to be clear. I want to make sure I used to like run in and go like try to shove it in front of their face as soon as I could. Now I just watch them and I see when their brain's kind of like, maybe there's a moment that I can like stick it in there that like, that they want to think about it. Because the other thing that's dangerous is that if the director looks at it and he's not really seeing it, it has to be a time that they can actually look at it. I mean, I've worked with directors who have tortured me. I've had to wait till 10:30 at night to show them pictures that, for something that's working the next day. But that's part of their process. That's not my process. Yeah. My process is much more prepared than that. And it's not that they're not prepared, they're just messing with you. But it's really important to kind of if you're talking images, you're talking like on a lot of the films we're kind of relating to now, a lot of geisha, whatever, Huntsman, those kind of, it's iconic images. It's images that it's not about 50 costume changes. It's about creating an iconic image for a character. And they may have 5 changes instead of 60. It depends, how on the process, but whatever it is, even if you have 60 changes, you have one change that's just change. It's the change that says who the guy is or the girl or whoever. And I think being able to show that to a director in a clean way on a clean shot is really important, because then they can see it.
I have a slide of Philadelphia here, and how does, which is another extraordinary piece of work, how does the variety of that world, say that the Fantastic Beasts or one of the Sweeney Todd, I suppose there's a period of theatricality in the fantasy world, and yet is it as challenging doing?
I think it's equally challenging. It's a different challenge to do sort of tell a story in a contemporary way in the costume world. There's like certain things, like in Philadelphia, I had, Tom had a tremendous amount of weight loss that he underwent in the film. Denzel was an up and coming lawyer. I mean, they didn't have money, either one of them. So they weren't in the best of suits. So you go to the Men's Warehouse and you try to get real with it as much as you can, and then you try to elevate it to a kind of palatable film level, because even though it's from the Men's Warehouse, you're putting it on Denzel Washington, so you don't want it to really look crap. You need to alter it and kind of tailor it in and make it look like it came from Men's Warehouse, but it actually fits him, which is kind of one of the saddest things, I think, on the street with menswear, is that you see these guys in their suits and they still have the little tack in the back pleat on them. It just makes you want to go up and clip it. But it's just like that there's not an awareness that you can take something kind of mundane, and if you make it fit right, it can look real, but it can look better. And that's sort of, I think, the secret to sort of modern day film design. Don't be indulgent that it has to be just that kind of off the thing. And I think in this, this was kind of,
that's one of my favorite of your costumes, Denzel Washington at the fancy dress party as a lawsuit. I was like, the film, there's this amazing palette, and I think, did you do proportion work with Tom, as far as, did he lose weight throughout the film, or were you trying to play with?
We played with it a lot, because we're going, everyone thinks, oh, you'll look skinnier if the clothes are bigger, and it didn't really work that way. It kind of made you look bigger if the clothes were bigger at a certain point. So we had to really, we really did test that out, and Jonathan, was really into that, and so it's an interesting kind of scale of things, and also the difference between photographing something like that and that thing in the room is oftentimes quite different. So the perception and the reality of it on film can sometimes be
I remember,
it's fine, but it can look bigger on film.
And so I remember when we were doing Theory of Everything, because you can't you can't shoot chronologically because of that. You have to be a certain weight at the beginning, and that's to play the character when they're healthy and when they're not. So interestingly, the costume design, but also the production design around it was also important. But as you say, you could never see it was always from what angle the shot was. You'd have to sort of style the clothing because sometimes those suits would for camera.
Yeah.
So this was directed by Jonathan Demme. One of the things I think is extraordinary is your collaborations. So you've worked twice with Jonathan on Silence of the Lambs, Philadelphia.
Married to him. I worked with him.
Oh, did you work with them all?
I did, but that's okay.
Shoddy research. Sorry.
Those are the most famous ones I worked with him.
But then Rob,
Beloved with.
On The Beloved, sorry, and Rob Marshall and Tim Burton on it. I'm going to move on to I've got so many of these images, we're not seeing any of them. This is Meryl Streep looking amazing, and I love this costume. But so Rob Marshall, what comes with collaboration other than sort of familiarity and shorthand? What do you enjoy about returning to work with people?
Well, it's the levels of the challenge, the levels of self-challenge, like don't go back to what you know they're going to like.
Yeah.
Because it's in some ways directors like certain things, and that in some ways you want them to like what they're going to like.
Yeah.
But you want to make it better than that. So, with Rob and, with Tim, who I've worked with the most of any director I've worked with, there's a certain kind of stylistic, kind of iconic kind of design that they like. Rob, he did the Rob's a Child, he was in the first cast of Cats. He's a New York guy. He's from this, he did Cabaret. He's done, he has that kind of vibe to what he likes. I did Chicago with Rob, which was my first film, but we just connected instantly in the sense of design. And he's a great collaborator in the sense that he's very prepared as a director. He's very controlling as a director, but he's very kind of open to seeing what you're going to do with it and letting you just go with it, but also being incredibly prepared with it.
Right.
Where a designer like Tim Burton, who's a great artist in his own right, and is intimidating in the sense that he's such a good artist and he's such a good designer in his own way.
As in practically, he's he started in animation.
I mean, he somebody I spoke to here is from Cal Arts. He went to Cal Arts. He was an animator, and the thing that happens when you collaborate with these guys like Tim, you kind of remember where they've come from. And one thing about an artist like that, if they've come from that sort of drawing background and that sort of graphic and cartoon background, in a sense, they see some things in the room in a different way than you're going to see them. They're going to see a doorknob. They're going to see a knot in the wood on the floor. They're going to want the shoe to be here, and it's a really interesting way to approach design because it's kind of unpredictable but predictable at the same time.
Right. So you have to preempt their unpredictable predictability.
Yeah. It's kind of like and take it somewhere else, like grow with it, and when you do and you connect with it, like I just had a really great time with Tim on Dumbo, which is kind of, I think, took what our collaborative process is to a new level. Same thing on Fantastic Beasts. I know we're not talking about the new one, but like working with David Yates again on a project like that, like taking like what we spun out before with all you guys and putting it in a new kind of parameter is a really great kind of journey with design. It's like doing, it's like taking something that you know really well, but making it something else entirely and being free to do that because the people you're working with give you the trust. Yeah. And it's a huge part of collaboration's trust, actually.
One of the things that there are specific sort of type of films like Into the Woods and Snow White and the Huntsman and I suppose in some ways Alice in Wonderland, they're fairy tale, they're fictional, and yet they have to be rooted somewhere. So how do you find films that don't involve you going and learning about the period or working on something? How do you find a sort of homogeny or create a world in which all of these characters can live, and yet you can have Johnny as you have all these different characters with such a sort of vibrancy to them, and yet the world feels one? Where do you start?
Well, I think with the musical films, say that, Sweeney, that, Chicago, that you start with the music.
Right.
And you sort of, that's your inspiration, and you spin off that. Say Chicago, it's really gritty, 1920s. I went, Man Ray came to mind, his abstract photographs of the 20s of the girls in the sort of bondage things and all that stuff was like my huge go-to on that movie. Photography of the era, depends. On Into the Woods, it's trickier because I really had to go somewhere to make that up. And so I went back to kind of early fairy tale kind of imagery and some books, some old fairy tale books that I had that were fairy tales that were interpreted kind of through the 40s and 50s of earlier fairy tale illustrations. So I took like the kind of combination of those two to come up with Into the kind of vibe for Into the Woods. For something like Alice in Wonderland, I mean, we have, Lewis Carroll's illustrations. We have Tennille's illustrations.
Nick's photo.
We have Nick's photo, which is stunning, beyond belief. If only she'd gotten to do that once in the costume, I would have been so happy. Thank God we had the photo shoot. But at the same time, like with that, the starting point was really the book and the story. So in those kind of fantasy things, that was kind of where I went with that journey, because in the old thing, she's vaguely tutored through Victorian eyes. Everybody's sort of got that sort of quasi-Victorian thing with a little touch of the kind of tongue-in-cheek modern thrown in to make it relatable to your audience and to young people and things like that. And clothes that are actually the right scale to the people wearing them. And, Alice, the second Alice, the Through the Looking Glass, like Sacha Baron Cohen's character, we have the best, like, he's a handful on a good day. But we had like the craziest fittings, because I'd make, instead of like, I got him for like one fitting, I think, and then he was away, and then I had to come back anyway. But I made his costume shapes out of brown paper. So I go, this is the hat shape, and this is your shoulders, to get the scale and the shape of it out of paper. So everyone in the room, because on those films, speaking of collaboration, sometimes you have a studio and you have producers in the room. You don't just have you and the directors, and you have a lot of voices. So with those things, I actually literally, in the room, we were cutting stuff out of paper to see what would work. And it really worked great. It really did work. And I was like, it's like the pre-pattern pattern. But it really was a way to actually visualize scale on the person in the room and what you could get away with and where you could go with it in a way that I hadn't done before. But it was really a fun, I've always loved those costumes made out of paper. I think they're beautiful. But it was a really fun way to discover some things about that, which had nothing to do with anything really in the story, but it's just a way of figuring it out quickly, which sometimes you really have.
Have you used that technique again?
I have used it again, especially in the millinery area, because sometimes hats can be quite, the scale can really be off, and by the time you get it with the actor in the room, it's a hard thing to correct quickly by blocking it.
I talk about this hat.
Well, that hat was actually, I bought that in Indonesia. Christine is here, my assistant from 20 some years. We're not saying how many, but we bought that in Jakarta at a flea market. And sometimes when I see things that I know someday in my life that are wonderful, inexpensive, and great, that to rework, I will buy them because I know I might not find them again.
So when did you find?
So cut to, you come to London, there's 10 at the flea market, but no, that was actually really. But sometimes you find these weird things on the street or wherever, and you're just like, I don't know what that's for, but it's not that much money, and I'm going to buy it. So
my wife and I have this thing called the one-day box, which is basically the box where you buy stuff. You're like, yeah, one day, maybe in this sort of aspirational world that you might live in, you never know.
I think it's
random
true.
bits of fabric. And
I think when you have an attraction to something, in a strange way like that, and I'm not a collector. I don't have enough of anything to have a real proper collection. But I have things, and a lot of them are little pieces of fabrics or things I've acquired along the way. And, I'll get a job and suddenly it'll be the thing that makes this costume for a job. I mean, you just never know. It's just something you connect to, and it's worth acquiring if it's not too crazy,
One of the amazing things from our point of view about wearing Colleen's costumes is is how they feel. Sometimes you work with costume designers and you feel that it's about what's on the outside, it's about what you're showing to the camera, but quite often from an actor's point of view, what you're finding comfort in a costume can come through a physicality or through how the way something moves. A lot of our work on Fantastic Beasts was how the coat moved, and also we actually we started with a Tom Brown coat, didn't we? For the jacket,
tightness,
for feeling that it was too tight within himself, and his trousers were a bit too sort of short because it was all about his gait. That notion, though, of what you give actors, and also because we see you at the earlier stages when we're still forming things and vulnerable, Colleen will often make things that are very specific to the actor that will never be seen. So on our Fantastic Beasts film, there was this intricate pocket design which you basically never seen in the film, but it was a way in which I knew that all the creatures could be hiding. And I know Ezra, who's here tonight, had the most stunning bit of embroidery, but it's not. Well, I don't know if I'm even allowed to say it, but it's not for anyone, but it's for us.
Yeah, it's for you. Yeah, it's for him. That was for Ezra.
But how do you think of those things? Where do they come from? Are they just?
It's my connection with, I think, with the. If I were you, what I mean, in a weird way, I'm not that person, but I'm like, I feel something sometimes for, like Ezra's embroidery or your thing that I feel like is some. It's like a present for you guys, like something I give you. That's like a thing that. I do it with Johnny a lot too, but that kind of it's a little bit of magic that makes you both smile at the same thing.
Yeah,
and luckily I have the talent around me that if I say, "Can you embroider an eagle in a day on the back of Ezra's coat or a phoenix? Can it happen? Can you do this?" I have people around me that have that capacity and ability to do that. So it's sort of, it's a really, I'm blessed in that I'm in a room that can do that. But there's also ways you can do it with a drawing on a piece of tape and put it in the back. It doesn't always have to be all that. It's just little things. And I think that when you're working with actors, they're people like you. They're creating characters, but there's kind of always got to be a little joke. It's kind of, there's got to be a little lightness to it that can make them smile when they put it on in the morning. And it 50 days in a row.
It weirdly makes you it doesn't feel like, it feels like clothes. Yeah, because it's the same relationship that you have with clothes, a specific reason that you bought something. Or tell me, in relation to the fashion world, so you started working for, was it at a Saint Laurent
store? Yeah.
How influential is that world to you? Is it something who are the designers that you sort of admire?
Well, so many, but I wish I admired less because I'd probably have more money. But obviously McQueen, is one of the greatest designers of our generation. I think Azzedine Alaïa, Yamamoto. I mean, so I'm not up on like everybody, but in film design, Adrian from the 40s and 50s. Piero Tosi is a great Italian designer in the 70s New Wave.
Will you refer to them, to designers specifically for inspiration for stuff, or do you tend to look at photos of people out in the world, or will you take a bit of everything?
Kind of both.
Yeah.
I mean, everything, like videos, people on the street. I mean, the street's the best. I mean, there's nothing like the street because it's so random and crazy and sometimes ridiculous beyond belief.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's really powerful. So I think the combination of books on design, designers, photographs, old photography, new photography, is really, I think in our world we have to that it all kind of happens at once in a way. It's so fast.
Do you have any? I found out online that you made you had a collection of handbags, accessories. Is it have you ever felt like you wanted to design a collection? Is it ever something you?
It's kind of, people always ask me that. I said, yeah, I would love to do that, but it's a whole other commitment. It'd be good to do like a collection and then go back.
Yeah.
Because it's a different, I mean, it would be at one point in my life, I made a choice.
Yeah.
And the choice I made is, for me, I think the right choice. I love fashion and I love contemporary fashion and seeing what everyone comes up with and all the new materials. And I feel like I'm part of it, even though I'm not, But I'm a great consumer.
But I also feel like now in this day and age with Twitter and Instagram, the sort of following of costume designers and the influence that has on fashion is pretty huge. Have you noticed that change?
Yeah, I think there's more synchronicity with it now, and also the whole kind of influence of cosplay is kind of from all that world is pretty intense. Like sometimes I see people on the street and they're like, oh, well, they did a good job with that. So, it's all part of all that instant sort of visualization of self. Of self, it's like Hannah was talking about it too, like self as yourself that day, as yourself not always, like the idea that this day maybe you'll have one thing on and your hair is one color, and the next day you'll have a visualization of yourself in a blonde wig with a purple dress, and that's a whole other kind of way of being in showbiz without being in showbiz.
Yeah. Disappointment. This scene here, which took place at the American Ministry of Magic, I've never witnessed costumes like it because all the international wizards from around the world had come, and I cannot tell you, our jaws were dropped as we walked into that room because of the work that Colleen had done. And you see it in the film, you see it, but the focus is on Carmen and on Catherine Waterston's scene. And there, of course, were moments when half of the room, of course, couldn't be seen. In the same film, Zoe Kravitz played Lita Lestrange, and she only appeared in a photograph in the film. It was a momentary introduction, and yet the costume that you made for her was this extraordinary kind of tinfoil couture creation. But of course, for the film, it just needs to be a photograph. So in the end, you only see the head. Like, what? But as a costume designer, you must always be like, but that one, like all that, the work that went. How do you deal with that?
You kind of go, you just go for it for everything because it's so much fun to do it, and it's so beautiful to do it for someone like Zoe Kravitz, who's exquisite. But you just kind of go for it, and then you're like, But the day that you don't go for it is the day the whole thing will be on camera. You don't go for the shoes. If you don't go for the whole thing, is the day that it's a mess.
On IMAX is
exactly like because I have a great story about that. I did a movie years ago called Wyatt Earp, which was a huge Western film, and in it I had, whenever you have Chinese workers from 1800 to 1920s, they have very specific footwear, and you have to make it. You can't, like, it's not the little slippers you buy in Chinatown with white socks. It's still like, it's very specific. So I had like a limited budget on this movie for all these railroad workers. So I had probably 50 or 60 pair of the right thing, and then I had cheated on the rest, and to the point of some of them actually being in those Chinese slippers with tube socks. And far away. I mean, the shots were so huge. It was like massive. And I was like, okay, because I said to the director, I don't have, he said, don't worry about it, And then I'm standing, and you're so spread apart from the people that are working where camera is. It was like an 800 mil lens, so it was like they were miles away. And I'm at the monitor, and there's this crane shot, and the crane shot starts on these guys'
Oh, no, oh God.
feet, and it goes up, and I was like, okay. And by the time I got there, it was done. Oh, no. And I said to the guy, can you cut it? He said, no, it's a continuous shot.
Oh, my God.
It's like, luckily when the movie came out, you like don't really see it, but it's like, it taught me a lesson in my life.
Oh, wow.
That it's
thoroughness, my God.
It's in the detail. I mean, the day that you don't do it is the day it'll have its big close-up.
Close-up on feet.
Close-up on feet. Cut to 5-minute crane shot. The interesting thing about that is it's a continuum. It evolves. So one thing is that there, in some areas it's gotten better because the middle ground, the middle to dark, at first was really bad. Like anything that was kind of darker than sort of a medium kind of gray went black, especially if it was next to anything light. So a lot of times what I learned to do is I'll overscreen a fabric with a lighter color that kicks back light. That's a kind of invisible texture that helps give it texture and light so it doesn't go flat in the lens. And the lighting is a huge part of that. And also I think the HD loves a little bit of reflection. So I try to use materials or a screen that's got a little bit of a kick in it. The other problem is fill light, which is, God's gift to the green screen, is like just plonking a huge kind of flat light in the, to light everything. Is where in film lighting, which, luckily at my age, I started out when people were actually really lighting for film. You got a different kind of lighting and a different kind of style of lighting that was more expensive because of the kind of lights. It was an LED. Now it translates all to HD anyway, so people are less. But the thing that's the upside is that HD's gotten better. So it's kind of a game I play with it, like trying to figure out how, what's going to work depending on the DP I'm working with and their particular style of lighting. Definitely dictates what materials and styles of materials I use. I have to say I'm kind of crappy at drawing, but I can kind of figure it out from, I do like rough drawings and images, but a lot of times my influence comes from like a textile or a kind of rough thing that way. I think that for me in my design process, the part of the design process that's really the most relevant is the actual first muslin on the stand, because no matter what you draw, it becomes something else when it's actually fabric on a dress stand. And that's kind of the collaboration with me on the design level is with my cutters, who are the pattern makers that I collaborate with. And being in a room alone with them when nobody's there, and just taking it and putting it on there and drawing on it and pinning it and figuring it out with them is really where the journey really begins for me. I'm there.
No.
And, I have very strong assistants, usually one or two on a show. But for me, at that point, when a costume's a big costume or even a prototype costume that I'm going to make a lot of, I have to be there. I don't have to be there 24, like watching as everybody's stitching it, but I'm there when it goes on the stand and it goes on the first person, because I don't think anyone else can see that for you in that way.
I had a thing the other day when we were doing a scene, and the costume that I wear in the film, that I was having to do it underwater, and it was being adjusted ever so slightly, basically for stunt work, really. And I remember sitting there with the gentleman who helps dress me, and Colleen had come literally for the fitting of that type, and I was like, I've never experienced that, and he was like, I've never experienced that. So she's there is the and it's I mean, back to kind of what I started, the graft, but literally. She designed Dumbo whilst designing the second Fantastic Beast, and is there in the morning when the extras arrive at 4 or 5 in the morning. I've got to say, as far as being inspired by a work ethic, it is really dumbfounding.
Well, I grew up on a farm, so it's an early day on the farm. But, I think that in order to have the people around you do the work that you want done, you have to do the work yourself. You can't be a pretender and really get away with it on a certain level. I mean, you can have great people and all that, but if you want the work to really represent you and what you want your work to look like, you have to see it. You have to be in the room with it. And so it's important to be there. It's a journey. I mean, I have amazing people in the States and here that are really good craftspeople, like stunning. I think I encountered them for the first time on the level of, that I'm working with now. Probably, I did a early Superman with Tim Burton that never saw the light of day and I collaborated with sculptors and jewelry makers and sort of people on that, and it sort of introduced me to the world of not just going and buying jewelry, which was kind of my knowledge point prior to that, but to find these people that are craftsmen and mold makers and that began my kind of, that opened the door to me to that could be part of the whole thing. And then, doing the Huntsman's movies and doing different movies now, what happens is when you find these people, you figure out that a way to journey them into your next project because they become part of your design family and you don't want to lose them. And they go off and do other things, which I think is really healthy. But at the same time, it's really great to know that if you don't like something, that you can go to this guy and say, can you make me, buttons that are like what I want? And they can do them in, now with the laser machines, that technology has gotten much faster, much cheaper. And, it's great because it sets you free. You can create every part of a costume in a way that you kind of were limited to before. But I think in that way, using technology with those people that are really good at craft and keep up with it, it's a pretty phenomenal thing, and it's very exciting on any level, on any film that you're doing, It's great when that happens, when it's something that kind of goes into life and flows back and forth. I think it's in Helena's case, she can wear a pair of bloomers on the street and it becomes something else. Like, everybody doesn't do that with their costumes, and actors have different relationships with them, but I mean, it's funny because sometimes at the beginning of the movie they go, "Oh yeah, I really want this," and by the end they're like, because they've been wearing it for like 4 months and they never want to see it again. But it's fun when I like seeing it. I like seeing it on the street. I was telling somebody the other day, like my biggest compliment is like when on Halloween when you see all the people out in your stuff. It's like little kids, drag queens, like everybody, like embracing the world. It's a fun thing.